Hi, Dana Seeger here again today to talk to you guys about block printing. Block printing, we're going to be doing linoleum cut today, but it also refers to wood block printing, even potato stamping. So there's a whole range of things you can do. So let's give it a try. So to start the block printing, I have a couple of tools. We have our linoleum block, which can come in a variety of different forms. This is like an easy cut or a soft block. There's also the mounted linoleum. This is called battleship linoleum because it's a grayish kind of battleship color. This is mounted on a block, but it also comes unmounted. And there's all different kinds. Some are softer than others. Some you can use the back side as well. But block printing just refers to a relief method in which you carve away the parts of the image that you would not like to print. So everything that you want to stay white gets carved away. And I'll show you how to do that. So if you think of like a rubber stamp, whatever you're going to be rolling the ink onto has to be raised up, just like rubber stamping. Potato stamping, if you've done that when you were little, same thing. I have our little carving tool, and these tools are all made by Speedball. This has a little container where all the carving tools live, and so when we're ready, we'll just take one of them out and insert it into our tool here. I've also got a brayer for rolling the ink on when it's time to print. Some Speedball's block printing ink, which is slightly different than other types of printmaking ink because you're just rolling it on the surface, so it has to stay a little stiffer. It's not going to ooze into the grooves like an intaglio print would. So the block printing ink is what you want to get if you're going to be doing the relief printing. I've also got a little template, so I'm going to be transferring the design that I choose onto the block. And you can see I've done that here. The benefits of doing that and not just starting with the carving, going right to carving, is that you can see the areas that you want to leave alone and just carve away all the areas that are the negative space. One thing that you do have to remember about block printing is that it will be printed as a mirror image. So if you want to include any type of writing, it has to be backwards. So I've written the name Betsy here backwards because when you print it face down, it will read correctly. So keep that in mind. I've made a little transfer paper just by rubbing the back of my paper with pencil, and that will help me to transfer pencil when I trace over my block. I'm just going to put that down, try to keep it as still as I can, and then I'm going to trace the areas that are black. And when I do that, the image will get transferred to the block via the graphite. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back when we're ready to cut. You could also use just regular pencil or Sharpie marker or pen directly on the block if you wanted to do it that way and you didn't have a pre-existing drawing that you wanted to transfer. Okay, now that I have transferred my design to the block, you can see that everywhere that is dark, I want to leave alone, and I'm going to carve away all the white areas. So first what I'm going to do is get my little tiny skinny gouge. And the way that this works is you loosen the chuck here, and you put the curved end into the skinny side of the tool. Loosen it the right way. And it should just slip in. There we go. And then tighten it down. And then you can carve away. So the gouges are meant to cut through the linoleum. This one does a pretty shallow cut. That's okay because we're just going to be doing the skinny areas here. And I'm just going to go all the way around to start with. You always, always, always want to carve away from your hand. Just like peeling a potato, you don't want to cut inward. Put your hand here and cut, because if you slip, out. So keep your hand back behind your cutting tool. And you can always keep rotating your tool as you go. I'm starting just with the outside. Traditional Japanese woodblock prints use this knife to cut around the edge, and then you just carve up to that. You can do that too, but I found for not such delicate work that it's easier just to use the skinnier carving tool. You will collect a lot of these little clippings or shavings. So far I have not figured out a way to use them, but if you do, post that, because you do go through a lot of those. So we'll just keep carving away from ourselves in the skinny lines until we're ready to switch to a either U-gouge for scooping out all the larger areas, or what's called a V-gouge, which is this deeper gouge for doing broader, slightly thicker lines than this one can do. Okay? Okay, now that we have all the kind of delicate areas carved out, we're going to switch our gauge to a deeper V so that we can clean up some of these rougher areas. Just a tip about the linoleum blocks. If you're using a harder linoleum, like the Battleship linoleum, you'll be able to get a lot finer detail and thinner lines. Because it's harder and it can withstand the carving a lot better. The softer ones are easier to cut, but they also kind of chip and they're a little bit rubberier, and so you won't get as fine a detail as you would with the Battleship linoleum, or even a wood if you're thinking about going that route. You can see here that I'm also working with just a single motif, which would be good, like this one, to do multiple areas for, say, like wrapping paper or fabric, textiles. The one that I've got here is a repeating pattern, and if you go to the $10 Taster repeating pattern video, you can see how to actually make your motif repeat so that when you stamp it next to and above itself, the pattern seamlessly repeats. So you can get a tighter pattern and you can get that nice sort of repeating element. So now I've got my gauge switched, and I'm just going to go back around and kind of clean up the areas that I want to make wider or broader holes, and I've got my image here for a reference. Just go slow. Try to get a feel for the way that the gouge cuts, so that you're not kind of going down and then skipping, or slipping. Keep in mind the direction that you're going as well, because sometimes the areas that you are carving will leave textures, and so if you just kind of go randomly, those random textures will show up. If you wanted to get sort of curved areas or parts that were more intentional, think about the direction of your lines, and you'll see that when we carve away the outside area. So it doesn't have to be really excessively deep. The brayer, when you roll the ink on, is just going to go right on the surface. So even these thin lines will keep the ink from falling in there. If you use a harder brayer, that will help keep the ink right on the surface. So now that I have my block carved, I'm ready to do a print. I've got a test print here. I'm going to squeeze out some block printing ink. So today I'm using Speedball block printing ink. It's water soluble, so it's easy to clean up. I squeezed a little bit out onto my palette here. Normally I would use a palette knife to kind of spread it out and work it before I go right into spreading it out with my brayer, but I don't have that today. Main thing you want to remember is that you have a thin, even coat. You don't want it to be globby and splotchy when you go to put it on your block. So I'm kind of rolling it out so that it's a little bit thinner, and I can do multiple passes if there isn't enough ink on it at first. But what you don't want to see is ink going into the grooves. You just want it to be raised up on the surface. If I didn't need any of this excess around here, I could trim it with a knife, like a utility knife. I could just cut the block so that it's just the circular motif, and that would ensure that none of this area would get inked. And once it's nice and inked, I'm going to take my paper that I've got, and you can either put the paper over the block and burnish, which is the traditional method, and if you're using a thin paper like this one, or a Japanese rice paper or mulberry paper, then you can actually see the ink impression through the back side. Or you can use it as a stamp, which is what I'm going to do now, and place it where you want it. Don't move it, but just kind of push down. It also helps if you're using a soft surface underneath. So if there's a little bit of a cushion, like with a cloth, then it helps to cushion that paper too. Peel it off, and you can see the little print impression. So you don't need to clean the block in between printings if you're going to use the same color. You just go right back to brayering on the color. Changing direction helps. If you're using a larger block, it also helps to go from the center out, like that, to ensure an even coating of ink. And then again, we'll turn it where we want it. Squeeze it down. Even pressure. I could keep repeating it like a stamp. I could use it on multiple things. I could even use fabric. I would use a fabric specific block printing ink if you're going to do it on cloth, and then heat set it so that you can throw it in the washing machine. If you see after you ink that any of these areas need to be carved out, then you can do that, especially after your test print. You can take your knife and carve around those areas that you need to remove. All right, when you're done, you want to just rinse it off in the sink. It's water soluble, so you can just rub your finger on it with Just running water, doesn't have to be hot. Little soap helps. Same with your brayer, just run it under water, and then you can clean the cheeks of the brayer as well, because that seems to collect ink too. Cleaning your tools properly will ensure that they last a long time and you can reuse them over and over again. You definitely want to clean your block and your brayer if you're going to switch colors. And that's it. Go have fun.